So, I needed money, you know? I was in a tough spot, had way too many bills to pay. So, when I saw this ad for a night janitor job, I didn't think twice. They mentioned some special cleaning and were paying way more than usual. At that point, to be honest, I didn't care what this special cleaning meant. Money was money. I got to the company, and my boss was a strange guy, kind of cold. He didn't say his name, didn't ask for mine either. Just handed me a heavy cleaning kit, way heavier than any other I'd ever used. There was a mop, bucket, some rags and cleaning products, but also some tools I'd never seen before. They looked like stuff to scrape something off, maybe scratches from the floor or something. It was weird, but I didn't ask. We got in a car, and he drove me to a building on the outskirts of the city. The place was already in ruins. Looked like it had been abandoned for years, with broken windows and doors hanging off rusty hinges. But what really caught my attention were the yellow police tape, like the kind you see at crime scenes. The whole area was surrounded, the tapes fluttering in the wind, making this eerie noise. I turned to my boss, and he noticed my expression because he chuckled like he thought it was funny. He gave me a pat on the back and said, "It's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it." His smile was cynical, and something about his voice bothered me. But I was there, I needed the job, so I swallowed the discomfort and went inside. As soon as I stepped into the building, I was hit by a smell that almost knocked me over. A mix of dried blood, something rotten, and chemicals all at once. It was so strong it made me gag. I tried covering my nose with my shirt, but the smell seemed to seep through, like it was woven into the air, impossible to ignore. I looked around, and the scene was disturbing. The floor and walls were stained red, blood splattered in all directions. Some spots had almost black stains, where the blood had dried and mixed with dirt. But the worst part was the handprints. Handprints, you know? Like someone had been dragging themselves, trying to escape or cling to the floor, scratching at the concrete. That sight left me in shock for a second. I had never seen anything like that in my life. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my focus, and started working. I grabbed the mop and began scrubbing the bloodstains. But as I cleaned, I started hearing whispers. At first, I thought it was just in my head. I mean, the place was creepy, right? So I figured my mind was playing tricks on me. But as I kept cleaning, the whispers got clearer. It sounded like someone was talking, real quiet, and the sound was coming from all around. My hand trembled on the mop, but I kept cleaning. After a while, those whispers turned into screams. Desperate, high-pitched screams, like someone was suffering, begging for help. My heart started pounding, and every muscle in my body screamed at me to drop everything and run. But for some reason I can't even explain, I followed the sound. My feet led me to a door, kind of hidden in the corner of the room. That door wasn't on the map my boss had given me. It was all rusty, barely even looked like a door. I should have ignored it, but my curiosity beat out my fear. I opened the door slowly, with my heart in my throat. Inside, man, I'll never forget what I saw. The smell was 1,000 times worse. It was the pure, concentrated stench of death that made me want to throw up. And there, hanging from the ceiling beams, were bodies. Human bodies, several of them, hanging like forgotten pieces in a butcher shop. Some were decomposed, flesh and skin rotting, eyes almost popping out of their sockets. Others were fresh, so fresh that the skin was still pale, like they'd been left there that same week. I froze. My eyes couldn't look away, but my mind was screaming that this was a nightmare. Somehow, I managed to pull myself away and stumbled out of that horrific room. Shaky, I made my way toward the exit, trying not to look back at anything. But as I opened the exit door, the boss was there, standing, watching me, with that same cynical smile, as if he'd seen everything. "You did a good job," he said calmly, like what I'd seen and it was the most normal thing in the world. "Now you know what we really do here." He looked at me, and that's when I understood everything. This cleaning wasn't about cleaning up crime scenes, not in the regular sense. They were part of the crime. I was there to cover up the tracks of something monstrous, something way bigger than I could have imagined. I was in shock, not knowing what to say or do. The boss kept looking at me with that sinister smile, like he knew exactly what I was thinking. I tried to move, but it felt like my feet were glued to the ground. My heart was racing, and all I wanted was to get out of there. But he blocked the door. He took a step towards me and put his hand on my shoulder firm, squeezing in a way that sent chills down my spine. He leaned in, speaking almost in a whisper, with a voice so cold it froze me to the bone. "Here, you're not just a janitor," he said. "Here, you're part of a secret. One that no one can know, got it?" I nodded, not daring to answer. Then he let go of my shoulder and, with a nod, signaled that I could leave. I just turned and walked out. My mind was a mess, a million thoughts, and none of them made any sense. When I got home, I felt like an empty sack. Every muscle, every nerve, everything hurt like I'd been beaten. I sat on the couch, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I knew I couldn't go back there, but I also knew they wouldn't just let me walk away. I'd seen too much. That night, I could barely sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those scenes in my head. The bloodstains, the handprints on the floor, the bodies, and the boss's face, with that cold, threatening smile. I spent the night wide awake, trying to decide what to do. But the next day, when my phone rang and I saw their number on the screen, panic washed over me. I answered, my voice shaking, and on the other end, it was the boss. "Good job last night. See you at midnight." He hung up before I could say anything. I had no choice. That night, I went back. Not because I wanted to, but because I knew there was no way out. When I got there, the boss was already waiting, with that look like he knew he had control over me. He handed me the cleaning kit again, and without a word, led me to another part of the building. The place was worse than the night before. More stains, more handprints, more bodies. I understood at that moment that this would be my new normal and that I would never escape this cycle. With each new cleaning, the boss revealed more of what really happened there, and each time, I found myself pulled even deeper into it. In the end, I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was an accomplice. It all started when I landed an internship at a financial consulting firm. And man, it wasn't just any firm. It was one of those big ones with glass walls that seemed to shine under the sunlight, and people wearing suits so expensive I swore they cost more than my car. It was the kind of place where you walk in and immediately feel the pressure. Everyone was moving fast, with serious looks on their faces, and conversations revolved around millions as if it were the price of coffee around the corner. Right from my first day, they sent me to a back room, which, to me, felt like some kind of punishment. The room had an old desk piled with papers, and a musty smell that only added to the sense of abandonment. "Organize these old files," they said. Normally, this would sound like a boring task, but for me, it was a chance to show I could make a difference, even in something so simple. At first, it was just standard paperwork. Normal stuff for a firm, reports, charts, and a bunch of documents that probably no one read. But as I flipped through the pages, I stumbled upon a folder that felt out of place. It was old, worn out, and had no label. I don't know why, but something about it caught my attention. I decided to open it, and as soon as I did, I realized something was very wrong. Inside the folder, I found documents detailing a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. It was a detailed plan of how the CEO and some executives were siphoning money into phantom accounts. I was shocked. My heart raced. Those pages revealed a crime that, if uncovered, could destroy the company and probably ruin the lives of those involved. While I was trying to process everything, the department head walked in. He was the kind of guy whose presence made you want to shrink back. As soon as he looked at me, I noticed his eyes were glued to the documents in my hands. In an instant, the atmosphere turned heavy. The silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Do you have any idea what you just found?" he asked, his coldness sending a chill down my spine. I was at a loss for words. I started to explain that I hadn't meant to and that I was just organizing the folders. But with every word I spoke, his expression didn't change. He just smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, you know? Then he dropped the bomb. "Actually, you've just been promoted." "Promoted?" I barely understood what was happening. He explained that now I was part of the scheme. I panicked, thinking about how this could all end. He gave me two options: stay quiet and join their team, or be silent forever. The word silent echoed in my mind like a bell, and I realized I had no choice. After that, he took me to a back room where I found something that froze my blood: a board on the wall. It had photos of former employees, each with a red X over their face. After that conversation, my mind was racing. I was taken to that strange, dark room filled with photos of people who'd been in the same situation I was now. Each of them had a red X over their face, as if they were targets in a twisted game. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was a nightmare, but the reality was that I was right in the middle of it. The department head, who now seemed like the villain of the story, watched me with a satisfied grin. He made me sit down and started explaining the rules of the game I was about to get involved in. He talked about how the company had a commitment to success and that sometimes you had to make drastic decisions to protect what was important. He wasn't just talking about money. It was about power and control. He detailed how the scheme worked. A series of phantom accounts were created, and each participating employee would get a slice of the pie. The CEO was in charge, but there was a support network, a sort of exclusive club. They controlled everything, from accounting to external relations. And now I was on the front lines, clueless about what to do. "Look, you're smart, so I'll give you a chance," he said. "You'll learn how things work. Let's see if you can survive this game." The threat was implicit, and I didn't need more explanations. He meant that if I didn't play the game right, I could end up like those people on the board. When he left, the room fell silent. I looked at the photos and felt a knot in my stomach. The image of the missing intern was a constant reminder of what could happen to me. What should I do now? It was a life or death decision, and the thought of betraying everything I had worked for left me in shock. As the days went by, I got introduced to the company's rituals. I learned to use accounting software in ways that even the toughest auditors wouldn't catch the discrepancies. And with each passing day, I sank deeper into this hole. I started lying to my family about what I was doing, always claiming the internship was amazing and full of learning. The truth was, I was becoming someone I never thought I'd be. Then came the new colleagues. I found myself surrounded by other interns, all with distant looks, as if they knew they were playing on a board much larger than themselves. There was always an atmosphere of distrust, but also camaraderie. Everyone was there for one reason: the chance to succeed, even if it meant staying quiet about the horrible things they saw. One night, while organizing documents, I found a file that left me feeling uneasy. It contained information about illegal transactions that were about to happen. It was a large sum of money and involved names I recognized. This only heightened my paranoia. What if I told someone? What if there was someone willing to listen? On the other hand, the feeling of being watched intensified. I felt like I was no longer alone. Some nights, as I left the office, I swore someone was following me. The shadows seemed longer, and the city, once familiar, now felt hostile and threatening. The faces on the streets were indistinguishable, but somehow I knew they were all connected to this web of corruption. One day, I received an anonymous message on my phone. It was a short text. "I know what you're doing. You're never getting out of this." Just like the last one, my heart stopped. Fear consumed me. That phrase echoed in my mind, a constant reminder that I was in danger, and the ghosts of that board were still out there, waiting for a new victim. With that, the idea of becoming a whistleblower seemed increasingly appealing, but also terrifying. I found myself torn between the desire to expose everything and the dread of the consequences. It was a game of chess, and I didn't know who the pieces were or who the real player was. What to do? With each passing day, the line between right and wrong blurred, and I wondered if there was still a way back. The tension was unbearable. The anonymous threats kept coming, and I was increasingly aware that time was running out. One night, after a stressful day at work, I decided I could no longer live like this. I needed an escape. I went to the room where it all began and stared at the board with the photos. Rage surged through me as I thought of those who had disappeared and what the company really was. With adrenaline pumping, I decided I was going to collect evidence. I made copies of the documents I'd discovered, including those about the illegal transactions. If I could manage to leave the company, I could take everything to the authorities. But right after I did that, I realized I was being watched. Someone knew what I was doing. I tried to leave the office without being noticed, but the feeling of being pursued was palpable. When I reached the parking lot, I saw a hooded figure waiting for me. My heart raced. It was the department head, and he was furious. He confronted me, and in those moments of tension, I realized there was no way to escape. I tried to justify my actions, but he just laughed, revealing he'd always known I'd try something. "Do you really think you can get out of this game?" he said, with a menacing glint in his eyes. With no more options, I started to run. Adrenaline took over, and I dashed through the dark streets, not looking back. I tried to call the police, but my phone had been switched off. The feeling of desperation enveloped me. Finally, I reached a police station and told them everything. I showed them the evidence and explained how the company operated. To my surprise, the police were already aware of rumors about the firm and initiated an investigation. But the feeling that the shadow of what I had uncovered was still there never left me. Months later, the company was dismantled, and several executives were arrested. I ended up in the witness protection program, but the price I paid was steep. I wasn't the same anymore. The paranoia continued to follow me, and what happened to the other interns never left my mind. The board with the red XS became a constant reminder of what could have been. The story didn't end for me. In fact, it was just beginning. The truth is, even when the sun is shining, there are always shadows lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. And somehow, I knew I was just another piece in a much larger game. It all started out pretty normal. I was hired to bartend at this luxury party, in this mansion way out in the middle of nowhere. The place had this kind of gothic style, like something straight out of a horror movie. Just looking at the house, I already had this feeling the night was going to be weird. The whole thing was organized by this famous music producer. You know, the type who's always in the news for being eccentric. So, I knew this party wasn't going to be exactly normal. But the pay? It was too good to pass up. So there I was, with clear instructions in my head. Serve the drinks, keep quiet, and most importantly, don't ask questions. As soon as I got there, the vibe was already strange. The mansion had this heavy silence hanging around it, kind of suffocating, but things were still pretty calm, or at least I thought they were. I went straight to the bar, set up, and started making drinks, watching people come in. And then the weirdness started to kick in. It was only high-profile people, politicians, business folks, celebrities. They arrived in this creepy silence, like they'd come for something a lot more serious than just music and drinks. I kept serving, but I noticed the guests exchanging these intense looks, like they were all there for something way more than just a party. The mansion was impressive, sure, but something about it gave me chills. The lights were dim, the music was muffled, and everyone spoke in murmurs, like they all shared some secret I had no clue about. And then it got stranger. After a while, I noticed a small group of guests slipping off toward this room at the end of the hall. They went one by one, super discreetly, like they didn't want anyone to notice. I started realizing that every time someone went in there, the music got louder. At first, I thought they were just trying to amp up the party vibes. But then I noticed something. It wasn't to make things livelier. It was more like they were trying to cover up whatever was happening in that room. I swear, I thought I heard some muffled noises, maybe even screams that the music was trying to drown out. My stomach twisted. I moved closer to the door, trying to get a peek without looking too suspicious. Through a crack, I only saw this red light and a few shadows moving around. But man, that was more than enough to make my heart race. It looked like someone was tied up in there. And the worst part? It seemed like there was a group watching, like they were enjoying some kind of twisted show. I couldn't see much more because a security guard suddenly appeared, slamming the door shut in my face with a "you shouldn't be here." I went back to the bar, but that scene was burned into my brain. At that moment, I knew this party was way more than just a party. I was standing there, frozen, with my heart pounding and a sick feeling rising in my throat. In that thick silence, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, and there was the same security guard who had shut the door on me before, standing there with this look that was somewhere between disdain and a twisted hint of amusement. He walked up to me, pushing me back into the room and shutting the door behind us. My stomach dropped. My brain was racing, scrambling to think of a way out, anything to get me out of there. But the guard just shook his head, laughing like he'd seen that desperate look 1,000 times before. "You've seen too much," he muttered as he walked closer. I could see on his face that he'd done this before. I tried to beg, swearing I wouldn't tell anyone, that I just wanted my pay and to get out. But he ignored me, circling me, studying me like he was figuring out his next move. In a last desperate move, I spotted a loose pipe near one of the stretchers and grabbed it, swinging it at him. It hit his shoulder enough to make him stumble back for a second, and that was all I needed. I bolted, throwing the door open and sprinting down the hall without looking back. I knew that if I stopped, I was done for. I reached the main floor. The party was still going strong, with laughter and clinking glasses like everything was totally normal. I burst out the front door, not caring if I looked suspicious. I flagged down the first cab I saw on the road, and when the driver asked where I'd come from, I stayed quiet. I didn't tell anyone. I mean, who would believe me? Now, every time I pass by that neighborhood, I feel a shiver, and it's like I can still hear the whispers of those who stayed behind.